Hey everybody, what's going on, and welcome to Guns N' Roses Central, and this is our interview with Jimmy Ashhurst. We interviewed him last Saturday. I really want to thank Jimmy for coming on. He was a great interview. He had some really great stories. He also shared with us this photo from 1987. This was taken in London. I don't know how many of you guys have seen this, but the credit goes to Jimmy for taking this photo. This is of Steven Adler. He was in London when Guns N' Roses played those 3 dates at the Marquee. In fact, he spent a lot of time with Guns N' Roses back in the 80s, and of course he played with Izzy Stradlin, the Juju Hounds. So we talked a lot about that stuff, as well as his career and his early inspirations in punk rock. So before we start the interview, I just want to let you guys know I had to go back in and edit some of the audio because Jeff was doing the interview from his lake house, and there was a lot of background noise coming in from his end. So the first 10 minutes or so, the volumes were a little bit low, so I went back and readjusted them. And the rest of the interview is totally fine. I was able to mute Jeff when he wasn't talking, and he was able to mute himself as well. So here's the interview with Jimmy Ashhurst. Again, big thank you to him, and I also want to give a big thank you to Fortified as well, who was able to put in a good word for us and help us get Jimmy on the podcast. So here it is for your guys' enjoyment.
All right.
So welcome everybody. We got a really special guest today. We got Jimmy Ashhurst. Am I saying your name right, Jimmy?
Ashhurst. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. You guys probably know Jimmy from Buckcherry and of course the Juju Hounds. What are you up to these days, Jimmy?
Nothing.
Just living life, taking it easy.
Yeah, kind of. I was like on the road almost constantly for a good 9 years straight, and it really was constant. So it takes a minute. At least I need a minute. So just kind of recovering from that and figuring out what the next step might be.
Well, as a musician, do you enjoy being on the road?
I do, unless I tend to get bored, and so I don't like necessarily cruising around the same part of the world, which I enjoy actual world stuff. So it got a little bit difficult the longer we stayed sort of in one market. It wasn't great for us, and I don't really think it was great ultimately for the fans either, because you're not really developing any new places in the world. You just keep going back to where the money is, and after a while that gets to be ridiculous. You got guys saying that they've seen your band 35 times or whatever, and that's a little bit extreme.
Yeah, exactly. So it was funny, before you came on the show, we were corresponding a bit, and you were in Europe, and I did some reading about you, and you actually grew up in Italy. That's where you were born. I
did, yeah. My dad was an army officer who worked for NATO, and so the Naples was the sort of the headquarters of the 6th Fleet, and at the time, so we were there for a long time, and my mom is Italian from Naples, so I was born around there, and learned the language as a young whippersnapper, and just floated around that town, man, and I love it, and I still do. So I'll go back any chance I get.
So did you come straight to LA from Italy, or did you hop around a bit? Because I've always heard that people who have family in the military, they're always kind of hopping from different cities to the next.
Right. Yeah, my dad did do a bit of hopping around when I was like an infant baby. It was sort of like a tour type of thing, I guess, I was on without realizing it. And but fortunately, because of my mom's roots, there was a sort of a bond she had to Naples, and so he requested an extended period of time. So I was able to sort of stick around in one place for a bit. So
what age did you come to LA at?
I was late teens, I don't know. I don't know what age I was. I was in high school. So I showed up here and finished off high school, and then found myself in Los Angeles during what was a pretty crazy period. Looking back on it, it just happened to circumstance, brought me here at a pretty crucial time in rock and roll. What it turns out to be, I mean, we didn't think of it that way at the time, but there were a lot of things kicking off. There was a lot of music going on all around us, and I was in sort of near Orange County at first. My family moved out there, and there were loads of punk bands and stuff. And so a little bit before that in Europe, I had sort of become aware and spent a lot of time listening to what was going on in London musically, and that was the tail end of all the punk rock stuff, and the first British, so all the original, the Clash, the Damned,
right,
Fingers, the Pistols, of course, all those guys, and so that was interesting and cool. And then when I came here, I discovered that there was a similar sentiment vibe going on, a bunch of guys that wanted to sort of change things up a little bit, do things differently, even though the Southern California version of that turned out to be, interpreted as more like a hard and fast, thing, whereas the British one seemed to be more song-oriented.
Yeah.
Thanks. And so I got a little bit of that exposure going on with, the bands around me at the time down there, like Social Distortion, and Vandals, and TSOL, and Adolescents, and just hundreds and hundreds. And then up here, there was a lot going on in Hollywood that I discovered once I got a car, and was able to get up here, and I found a lot of like-minded people doing the same thing. And back then, of course, obviously being pre-internet, the only way, if you were an aspiring musician, the only way to do anything was to grab the guys in your band and stuff them in a station wagon and drive. You had to actually physically go to the cities where things were happening. That's why we ended up with so many regional sounds in this country. We have the Seattle sound, and LA, it's just period, and New York City before that, and Cleveland and Detroit, and all these fabulous famous music cities in this country that are remembered for those periods in rock and roll. And it was kind of Los Angeles's turn right around those few years. It was starting to kick off. So very lucky.
So when you got to LA, it wasn't culture shock. You absorbed it pretty fast.
It was total culture shock at first because I was in the suburbs. It took me a while to sort of, as I said, to get mobile and get up to the actual city to find a little more comfort. It was a little bit more sort of a rural mentality out there. I guess that's to put it delicately. But yeah, I did. There was a lot, and there was so much kicking on here in Hollywood that eventually is where I gravitated towards. And there were a lot of the sort of subcultures which were going on at the time. It was counterculture, there were little pockets of different subcultures, and that, I think, all of that led up, eventually culminated in there being a sort of blend, and the punk rock sort of was then influenced by the more, rock style, if you will, and that's what started to happen in Hollywood with, I think the first band I saw that really influenced me in that regard was a band called the Joneses, and these guys were playing, punk rock bars and doing Aerosmith songs, covers, and so it was like a blend of that. They did it really, really well. They took the best parts of both styles and sort of blended those together, and I think ultimately that is what Guns N' Roses, bands like them, ended up adopting, and for in different ways, for better or for worse. There's some guys who took the rock thing and ran with it. But you know, we really, in the very beginning, sort of appreciated our guys for having that punk rock underground element to them, and they were a little bit rougher and more street than some of the bands that came later. You know, out of that, you know, hair, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, well, like Jimmy, when you were like in LA, was there a lot of hair? So you had like the punk rock scene, but you also was that hair metal scene going on in the background too?
It happened way later. You know, it did develop, but my guys weren't really into that, you know, too much. It was it was a little bit I don't know, a little bit
Glam.
Yeah, it was a little lame what it was. But I just never really gravitated towards that aspect of it. I come from a little bit more of a, you know, it started to turn into the, you know, the big showmanship and all of that kind of stuff, and a lot of you know, a lot of posing and a lot of
More about the attitude than the music.
Well, yeah, and the music wasn't that great. In a lot of instances. I mean, there was, you know, as I said, there were some guys who, you know, because as a, you know, the punk rock kids used to get chased around a lot back then. You know, it wasn't a cool thing with sort of mainstream people, and so we were, you know, we kind of had a hard time there at the beginning, and so, you know, to see that sort of, I don't know, a lot of people moved here because of that vibe that they got, that, you know, they could have this, you know, hair metal band and move here and get a record deal. And that did happen, but, you know, we got a lot of guys from out of town sort of showing up.
Right.
So, yeah.
When you guys were packing in this, you know, this station wagon, and you guys were driving up to the city, who were you listening to in the car? Who were your influences growing up?
Well, I didn't have a station wagon, but you know, I was still listening to the same stuff. Really, I was discovering, you know, at that point. You know, I think I'd gone back. I was in a band once I started playing, because I didn't really actually play when I first arrived here. I loved the music and I was interested in it, but I didn't know how to play anything. I didn't think I could play anything. And but that was sort of one of the benefits of you know, the sort of punk rock movement, was that you see guys doing it and you understood that you could do it too. So that was really exciting, and so that's where a lot of these, you know, that whole wellspring of bands, I think, developed around that idea. And that was sort of fundamental. So the more I learned about, you know, started learning about music and figuring out what I liked and what I didn't like, you know, I then went back in history and sort of picked out the things that I did like, and you know, a lot of rock things as well. Like it's around when I discovered the Small Faces and a lot of 60s bands, and that went on to influence a lot more what I was doing. And we were all sort of learning how to play at the same time, so we were sort of picking and choosing what aspects of different periods and different bands that influenced us. You know, so for me, there was the British bands were a huge part of that. You know. As I said, and then, you know, you discover Cheap Trick, and you realize that there's, you know, and we had the Ramones, you know, and a bunch of American bands as well, and so that sort of starts to all make sense in a weird way. That makes sense.
It does.
So the first band that you guys had, what was the first band you played in LA?
At the very beginning, I mean, I happened to move into a house that was near my dear friend Mark Ford, who went on to be
like Rose. I've met Mark a few times.
Yeah, Mark lived right down the road, right? And so I ended up with another buddy of mine, Jose. We're all like local high school guys, you know, and my friend Donnie. And we all kind of started to rehearse in Mark's mom's garage, around the same time. So I was learning. Mark already knew how to play and was amazing. And he was very patient and helped me a lot, and I kind of learned by watching his hand on the guitar neck. If he was in a certain position, I figured, I could do that and it would sound okay. And so that's sort of how that started off. But it was hours and hours and hours every day, like all day, and learning things like how to play with other people, like learning details like dynamics, which I miss a lot in what I'm hearing today, where a band sort of, gets quiet and then gets louder, and it happens naturally. It's not, anybody turning a knob. You just do it. And that can build and relieve tension in a track, if you record it that way. And that's what bands do live, or at least that's what they used to do. And, and that makes it, sound a lot more organic and ultimately better, in my estimation.
So one band that I wanted to ask you about was the Broken Homes. That was like one of your early bands that you played with, and you guys had some success in that band.
Well, in that we got a record deal, yeah, and we were allowed to tour because back then, if you got a record deal, it meant they put some money into you, and they would allow you, which would then allow you to tour. So that's we got lucky, and I think at the time we got signed to MCA Records in 1985, which I believe was before the GNR signing, when that changed sort of the industry. They were looking for more hard rock, heavy metal sort of vibe than we were. We were a rock and roll band, and there's a big difference. So we were, we had a singer who was from Philadelphia, and he, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, around there, like steel country, and Blue-Eyed Soul as well. So when he showed up, he was a little bit, a few years older than Craig Ross and myself. But, meeting Craig opened up a whole world to me. Meeting both of them, Michael Doman and Craig Ross, opened up several different worlds, because Craig, like me, was a huge Clash fan, and yet he's also a massive Eric Clapton, and so he understood open tunings. It's the first time I'd ever worked with anyone who played an open G, and he was is still a wonderful performer. One of the best guitar players of our generation. I happen to be very lucky in having stumbled into like the two best guitar players currently on the planet at that time. So I was very, very fortunate. But Michael Doman, the singer, understood. He brought with him a wealth of knowledge from rock and roll. I mean, that's where these guys taught me about Chuck Berry and open tunings and 3-chord songs and all of that wonderful stuff. And so I learned a lot, whereas prior to meeting those guys, I was sort of fumbling in the dark. So that was a valuable experience as well. And then that allowed us to we made a record. So the first record was my first time in a recording studio. That was my first time touring. We toured with Stevie Ray Vaughan in those early days in a van, those are irreplaceable experiences. Georgia Satellites we toured with In Excess for a minute, even Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. We did a lot of touring, but mostly just nationwide. We unfortunately, in what I view as a crucial mistake, we never made it to the UK and to Europe. And I'll speak more on that point a bit in a minute when you ask me a relevant question to that.
So when you guys get signed by a record label like MCA, do you think that at that point that you guys have made it and you're set for life, or was there a lot of pressure?
Oh yeah, dude. I remember that shit. I remember that night. Because we played like on Friday, maybe signed in the offices, signed a bunch of papers, like on the Monday. And Monday night, man, I was back at home just saying, fuck yeah, I'm out of it. I'm quitting school. I was going to UCLA at the time. And, so, yeah, man, I thought we had it made. Nobody had gotten signed from the LA Underground really to a major label. I think from the point of like Van Halen or something. I think that there had been a long gap before the majors had sort of taken a look at Los Angeles. But as it happens with corporations of any kind, they respond to an event that is normally the seed of that event is always the people. At least it was back then. So, I mean, if you get enough people involved in a scene and you have enough bands, enough musicians, then you end up with enough clubs that open up. And then it's literally, each show is a massive event. And the corporations eventually are sort of forced to take notice. And I think that's what happened back then here. And I think that's also what has happened over time in other cities in the world.
So how long did you guys tour for? And you guys toured with some pretty big, like Stevie Ray Vaughan, Joan Jett. I guess it's a two-part question. Was there any particular artist that you learned the most from, like on tour when you were, with your first big band?
Yeah, all of them, man. These guys were pros. We were a bunch of, shitheads. So we were trying to figure it out. We were figuring out sort of how as we went. We were really, young, and so those were invaluable experiences. Figuring out how a touring crew works. The logistics of physically getting places and not being late, and all of those things, which are you can't really learn from a book. You have to go out and do them.
What was the hardest thing to adapt to on the road, like not being able to sleep in and having to get up, or having to make sure you didn't get sick from city to city? Like, what was the hardest thing to adapt to when you first started touring?
Snow, probably. That shit sucks. We're from California, man. It was freaking cold. And I remember the guys would I had like the way back in the van. Some kind of asshole or whatever. So they put me way back in the van. And so I was sleeping there like on my guitar cases, and they'd just leave me in the van sort of, because they couldn't wake me up sometimes to go in for sound check. So they'd leave me back there until I got frostbite, or woke up on my own. But we did learn it load. It was ridiculous. I mean, the tour was Stevie Ray and his whole crew was insane. Seeing how they would set up, the amps. He had a particular way of doing that, where the sound guy would go around. We played a lot of concrete sort of buildings, like hockey arenas and shit like that. And so they'd go around and find like a room that had certain acoustic qualities to it and set up a microphone. Sometimes that was our room. That would be our dressing room. They'd be like, all right, boys, you got to bounce out because we got to stick a microphone in here or whatever to get a sound that they would then pipe out through the PA, and so it was, just little tricks like that were outrageously interesting. And then, making the records as well. We were learning, again, it was such a valuable experience because, we had, back then the money would be spent. And so we had budgets to stay in a recording studio for an extended period of time to make the record. And we'd have producers, guys like Andy Johns spring to mind, who did, I believe, our second or third record. And then we had a brief experience where Ian Hunter and Mick Ronson had come through to produce an album. They ended up only doing a couple of songs, but we did spend some time in pre-production with them, taking our songs and then playing them to them, and then watching Ian Hunter sort of suggest changes to those songs that we were, of course, initially resistant to, but after we figured out he probably knew a hell of a lot more than what we were talking about, we do it, and it would be this wonderful change. So that was those were all we were around great people, touring with the Georgia Satellites, which then affected later on the formation of the Juju Hounds, of course. They were the most incredible, bar band I'd ever seen in my life. We were playing these places where at the end of the night, sweat was literally dripping from the ceiling. The bartenders were all on the bar dancing, and it was, they just had the crowd in the palm of their hands, every night. So I remember Craig and I, especially on Stevie Ray and on the Satellites tour, we would finish playing and then just run around to the front immediately afterwards to get our spot, like up at the railing, to watch the pros do it.
And that's, I guess, how you met Rick Richards, who eventually played into the Juju Hounds.
Correct. Yes.
So getting back to the point you brought about with your band not going in touring in Europe, it's kind of funny because I bring some parallels to Guns N' Roses. Like, they were not having a lot of initial success in the US when their album came out, and they kind of went to the UK. They did a couple shows, and that's kind of how the word got back that, hey, there's this big band breaking out. Like, so when you guys did all these tours with these different big artists, it was just limited to the States, I guess.
In the Broken Homes, it was.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and that's a great observation, and I'm glad you said it, because I was going to say something very similar, in that we, unfortunately, I don't know why this is, and but it seems to been a pervasive thing over my years doing this. There doesn't seem to be a clear marketing path in the United States for rock and roll music. There seems to be one for really hard rock and heavy metal side of things. And then there's another one for classic rock. But unfortunately, if there's new music that sounds sort of like classic rock, they have to wait 20 years, for you to have access to those radio stations. So that doesn't really help you out a whole lot, in the beginning. I don't know why that is, but it's been a thing, going back decades. Our blues and jazz artists, in the 30s and 40s, all went to Paris, before they were sort of recognized here or appreciated at all. I have no idea, because to me, rock and roll, as it stands, is a very quintessentially American cultural export.
Absolutely, yeah, it is,
and perhaps maybe one of the most influential that we've ever produced. There's events, world events, changed. The Berlin Wall partially came down because the guys behind it were, looking for some rock and roll. So I don't understand why, unless the people who control those sort of things can't really tell the difference. But looking back, we have, again, the blues and the jazz guys. And then that, it went up into the 60s. Jimi Hendrix had to go to the UK because he wasn't making any inroads here. And if you look at, records like, and then everyone will say, well, Tom Petty. But if you look at Tom Petty's first record, it was marketed as a new wave.
Well, it's funny because even like on satellite radio, they play Tom Petty on like new wave stations, and I never understood that.
Sure. I mean, they had him tie and all that jazz, and so it's outrageous. And then during the period when I'd already ran into this sort of buzzsaw of cultural destruction in the Broken Homes, because nobody really knew what to do with us. They say, well, we like it. It's music that we would listen to, but we don't know how to market it. And, our response to that was always, well, do you think you're the only one who would like this? Because I'm sure that if you like it, there's some other people out there who might as well. And it also speaks to another observation, in that when the Juju Hounds album came out, it seemed to confuse a lot of people here in the United States. Now, here we are, 25, 26 years later, or whatever it is, and people seem to, have developed an appreciation for it more over the years than what we were feeling at the time. So that's just sort of how it goes. And as you said, during the time when the Juju Hounds record came out, it was still being, you could only find it in the record stores in the sort of, hard rock metal bin, as along with like the Black Crowes and stuff like that, which, I'm playing mandolin on the thing, and I'm like, it was very confusing. So, and, it was hard to find radio stations. So you got all that going on.
Yeah, it's like a very confusing time. I guess as an artist, it's got to be frustrating to deal with these record labels. You don't really know how to market your band.
It gets old after, 25, 30 years. Yeah, it certainly does. It's a struggle.
So before we get to the Juju Hounds, you'd mentioned that, in your band Broken Homes, you play with Craig Ross, who I think is a fantastic guitar player. I always feel like he's underrated or underappreciated when we talk about great guitar players. But he ended up going and playing with Lenny Kravitz. Like, how did that whole thing happen where he went, like, did Lenny Kravitz come check you guys out? And he's like, oh, I like that guitar player a lot.
He did. And I was really happy to see him. I said, oh, man, Lenny's here to see us. And then it turns out he was here to steal my guitar player. But, it's all love. It all worked out. We, after that, Craig, of course, went to do that, and he still does that, and very well. And during that period was a little bit of a hiccup in my world, since I was without a band, and then I ended up. Mark sort of showed up one day and said, hey, well, we lost our bass player in Burning Tree, come over and do this record. And a little bit prior to that, I had learned of, while the Broken Homes were still going on, I had learned of, another band in Atlanta, the Black Crowes, having been formed. And I learned of them through the Georgia Satellites' tour manager, Kevin Jennings, who played a cassette, I believe, in my car. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like, wow, this is amazing. And that's what developed into Shake Your Moneymaker, I guess. That was the first record. So there was that going on. And as a result of that, I guess Chris and those guys had heard of the Broken Homes. And so when Chris first came to LA, he looked me up, and I think, he needed like a dime bag of weed or something. So we hooked it up, and so we became friends. And then over time, Chris, started learning more about what was going on in the LA thing. And so that's how, I don't know if I introduced or whatever happened, but we were all together, and that's how his relationship with Mark began. And then, I think at one point he got Burning Tree to tour, supporting a leg of a Crowes tour, and then so that's where we were. And then after that, Mark lost his bass player Muddy out of that band, and asked me to sort of jump in to do what was going to be their second album for Epic.
Yeah.
Records.
And do you think that tour helped Mark get that gig in the Crowes?
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. Absolutely. I think, that pretty much solidified that. So in fact, that's what happened. I was in the band with Mark, getting ready to do, learning the songs and getting ready to do what would be this second album, when he called me from Georgia, like, hey man, I'm staying around here, I think I'm gonna play with Chris and them. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. But this all happened very quickly after the Broken Homes, and so it was at that moment where I'm like, fuck, because I was only in the band for a couple of months or something. We maybe did like 2 or 3 local shows, and that was it. We were just waiting to record. So there I was, sort of back at home, like, wow, what's going to happen here? And just coincidentally, I was here, like where I live right now. I was watching TV, and I remember seeing Kurt Loder, I guess it was, saying something about, breaking news, Izzy Stradlin has left Guns N' Roses. So I was like, I wonder what Izzy's going to be doing. And literally, the phone rang and it was him. So he was asking me what my plans were. I'm like, dude, I don't know. I'm going to go get a sandwich or something. He's like, no, musically, So I'm like, and he said, okay, I'll be at your house in 48 hours. And he was, so he showed up here and that was the beginning of it.
Did you know the guys from Guns N' Roses back from like the 80s, like before they broke big or like during the time they broke big?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody sort of knew everybody, it was a really, really lively time. And as I said, there was a club going on every night of the week and you would see the same people, moving around like sort of as a group to these events around town. And so, and we had so many mutual friends, and back then it was like, and everybody was starving, we didn't have any money. And so we were all trying to figure out how to survive. And so you'd end up, it's kind of fucked up. But like you think of like the stories where the only people we knew who had cash consistently were strippers, right?
Right. That's what I've heard.
Right. And so you'd sort of bounce around and then whatever club you ended up at last, you sort of had, you knew where the closest one lived. And so you'd sort of show up there and chances are there'd be like a pizza or something going on and a place to sleep on the floor. So you'd literally wake up sometimes and step over, bodies. And sometimes these guys were in all these other bands. So that's just how it was. And so, yeah, I had known, all of those guys couldn't tell you who I met first or whatever, but Izzy and I had become buddies. And later on during the GNR mega, epic sort of explosion, I was incredibly fortunate to have been around all of those guys, and my relationship with Izzy sort of began early on. Like the record had been out, and again, speaking back to that point about them going over to the UK, the record was kind of dead at that point. It had been out for almost a year and really had not made significant inroads in being what we all know today. So they went to the UK, and it was, credit their manager at the time, Alan Niven, for having made that decision, because they were able to go there, and obviously they were incredibly appreciated there. And it was sort of a phenomenon. When you're dealing with a more concentrated area, United Kingdom, you can tour it in 3 weeks, in a van. It doesn't cost you a lot, and you can sort of base there for a little while. And then when something is exciting, it's very concentrated excitement. It's all happening in one area. So you get all of the music press and you get all of that excitement, and then you can bring that back and sort of sell it back to, us here in America.
So did you see the guys, like, it's kind of crazy to think about it. Appetite wasn't a hit when it came out, but like, did you see Izzy, like, did they start to rethink their career path at that point and be like, maybe music isn't going to work out and I got to do something else?
Nah, I don't think anyone around during that time really was thinking along those lines. It was kind of a do or die attitude that everyone had. A lot of people, in fact, did die, but we didn't really entertain a lot of, and the job in the bank probably wasn't going to work out at that point for any of us.
So being close to Izzy, were you surprised by the news that he had left Guns, or you kind of saw this coming because he had been sober for a couple of years, and it seemed like the daily reality of being in the world's biggest band there was just so many complexities involved that.
Yeah. For my money, Izzy was kind of to the guys, there was, again, going back to that divide little bit of a divide that there was in Los Angeles. There were sort of the underground guys, and then there were sort of the mainstream guys. And Izzy was always more of an underground guy. So there was a little bit in the beginning. It made a lot of sense since those guys were all rough and ready, and that was appealing. And as it sort of started to morph into something, I think that was a little bit different than what maybe he intended. I don't know. I can't speak for him. It's just my observation. But I think that started to wear down a little bit. You know, I happened to be in London during the very early marquee shows. I had gone there with a friend, Stiv Baders, and just a lot of weird circumstances happened, and I ended up sort of, those guys, the GNR guys, kind of took me. I was kind of like roaming around on the street, and they kind of took me in and let me stay with them. They had this apartment, and you know, Axel and Izzy were upstairs, and then me and Slash and Duff and Dell and another buddy of ours, Todd Crew, who's rest in peace, who passed away a little bit after that. We were sort of in the bottom apartment, and you know, at that point, I think that was the essence of what Guns N' Roses was. For all intents and purposes, I think that was the vision, you know, a lot of those guys had, or maybe it wasn't a vision, it just happened naturally. I think, you know, a little while after that, it started to change a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
You knew, gosh, you just said his name. He was in Jet Boy. Sorry.
Todd Crew.
Sorry, Todd. Yeah, you knew Todd. Can you help with us? I've heard rumors, and since you knew both Axel and him personally, do you know if the microphone stand that Axel uses is the wheel at the bottom from one of Todd's old rat rods?
Oh man, I don't know. I've never heard that. That's interesting. It could have been. I don't know. I didn't know Todd really well. You know, he was there with us at that point. And I spent, you know, a few weeks with him there, but he passed away like right after that, literally days after that. So I wasn't familiar. Those guys were from San Francisco, so I never saw him as any of his cars, but you know, it would have made sense. He was certainly around.
That's the rumor.
Yeah, that's something that Jeff had indicated. I wanted to ask you, Jimmy, is there anything about those marquee gigs that you remember that really stood out?
If I remember correctly, it was, you know, I didn't really even go out in front. I was in the back, which was like, right. I mean, it's not a big place, man. It's like a stage and a door and a room behind it, you know, and then there's a room in front of it that's a little bit bigger. But it was so packed, I didn't go out to watch the guys from the front. I was just waiting. I mean, I'd seen them 1,000 times already in LA, and it wasn't like a world-shaking event to me. I was just sort of in the back waiting for them to get done so we could go and have some fun.
Did you see any video cameras going on during those shows? Because that's a huge question. The fans want to know if any of that was videotaped.
I remember there being a guy, man, and maybe this is what they're talking about, because I have heard a bit of, you know, and I saw standing out in front at one point, because I think one of them may have taken place on a Sunday or something, but Slash, there was a guy who had a giant, you know, one of those ones with the friggin' light and everything, and Slash got him, and they went around front interviewing all the people standing out in front who were standing in line, and Slash was sort of berating them for church.
Arlette Vericki told us that story, how he would just walk up to people waiting in line and like be like, "Who's playing tonight?"
Yeah. There was a lot of you know, shenanigans happening in the jokes area. So that probably was one of them. But there were a lot more that, you know, hopefully don't turn into rumors at any point. But yeah, that is, I can confirm there was a video camera happening. And I'm sure there's tons of footage. I just don't know. I wouldn't know where to look.
Yeah, like Jimmy, you talked about being close with Izzy because of your punk roots and being a big fan of punk rock. Were you also close with Duff?
Yeah, not as close because I just don't know. Our circumstances never put us in this, as many of the same places. But Izzy actually brought me along. I mean, we were pals. So I mean, he I was, through him, I was able to tag along. I mean, I was around quite a lot because as you would I would tag along. And so I was in places that, these guys would be like, dude, how did you get here? Or what, I kept showing up all around the world. And so it was, I think they thought that was funny, because they'd go to London and boom, there I am, like on the street in London. And so, I think they sort of got to know me that way. But Izzy brought me around for some pivotal stuff, man, like the GNR Rolling Stones gig at the Coliseum. I was there with him, in the van and at the Bonaventure Hotel where their backstage had been set up, and I was just in awe, man. It was, it was amazing seeing guys that were. I mean, I think there were a couple of gigs early on where they opened up for the Broken Homes, and so it was really, really cool and in a way infuriating at the same time that these guys were blowing up like no one had ever seen, and whereas my band was sort of not, and so
right.
that occurring to me in London at those marquee days, because I saw the publicity machine was insane. They had like the full super gigantic posters in all the tube stations, so I would go back and get on the phone like, what the fuck, man, where's our shit? And so, but that's just how it happened. So Izzy gave me some amazing experiences during that time. The Stones, those two Stones gigs, at the Coliseum, and then a few days later, or maybe the next day, I don't know, but the Stones invited Izzy and Axl to do that. What amounted to the first paper.
Yeah, the Atlantic City gigs.
Yeah, that was in Atlantic City. So Izzy invited me along to that, and that was on the Stones' tab. They paid, and so me and Izzy and Axl and Alan, I think, were the ones who were on that plane and flew over there. So that was, friggin' insane. I was like over the moon about meeting those guys, and that's, I had met, I'd known Ronnie a little bit prior to that because of my involvement with Ian McLagan, and I played in Ian's band, and Ronnie, would sort of sit in with us sometimes to do like old Faces songs and stuff.
Right.
So there was that. So I knew him, but that was my first experience with Keith and with the rest of the Stones guys, and being able to just be a fly on the wall and watch how that operation operated. Because if the Guns N' Roses organization was here, the Stones was like through.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was outrageous. I couldn't believe their security guys, like how those guys work, because usually, you see guys that giant, and you see these guys rolling around. But the Stones didn't have any, they just had all these little short guys who were like SAS, like British Special Forces. And if somebody was started to behave a little, started creating a scene or something, they would just like vanish. All of a sudden you'd look up and they were just gone. And it was all done in a very, very English, sort of subtle, and
that's so badass.
yeah, incredible.
It's like some 007 stuff.
Full on, man. These guys are just poof, gone, and then you'd see the little guy come back, and he's not even breathing hard. It was amazing. And there were a lot of funny moments in that. Just to watch the interaction between the old guard and like sort of the new guys, the upstart new guys. And, I think, maybe they learned a little bit from that experience. And I certainly did, man. It was great.
That's awesome. So I getting now to the back to the Juju Hounds. So when Izzy came and showed up, like, did you know at that point, like did he have a band, or was it just him and he was starting to look for people to put a band together with?
Yeah, no, there was no band. It was just an idea. You know, he wanted to make a record. There was no thought of a tour. There were no gigs or anything. I think he just had, you know, a few, like, I don't even know if well, I know for sure we did not have all of the songs. He had some ideas. And so that's how that began. And so we just, you know, of course, I'm going to do that. And so we needed a couple of things. You know, we needed a studio and we needed a band. So we ended up, I'm not sure how it was found. Oh, and we needed Alan Niven. And so we got Alan back, and or Izzy got Alan back, you know, because at that point he had not been managing GNR anymore. So we got Alan back, and I think Alan found the recording studio for us because Izzy did not want anything to do with Hollywood at that point. So he rented a house sort of in the outskirts, and it was closer to this place that Alan found in Redondo Beach. And so we just kind of booked a lockout down there and went in, and there was no producer. There was no anything initially. There was only the guys who worked at that studio. And I think they were all pretty surprised to see us, you know, in the beginning. And the guy who eventually was became the producer of the Juju Hounds record, Eddie Ashworth, was the house engineer, and he was sort of working on whatever projects came through. And when we arrived, and so during that, we, you know, it was just wonderful that we had that lockout. We had the time to develop the songs, and then of course to get the guys, you know, to solidify who the other guys involved were going to be. And that all occurred at Total Access Studios in Redondo Beach.
Did you guys have like a lot of well-known musicians who auditioned for the Juju Hounds, or how did you guys go about, I guess, looking for people? Like, did you put out ads in like the recycler, or was it just like, how did that whole process go?
Being any auditions, there was, you know, he said to me that he wanted a guitar player like Rick Richards, and so you know, let's get Rick Richards. So we did, and then I had been playing at the very tail end of the Broken Homes. We had Chalo Quintana playing with us. You know, I sort of that was my first taste of a little Charlie, and as a rhythm section, you know, once you do that, you never go back. So Charlie was obvious, and even though we did mess around, I think in the very beginning with Donnie from Burning Tree, who I asked to come down at first, that turned into Charlie when Charlie became available, because he, I believe, had been playing with Bob Dylan, and we weren't sure that, you know, I mean, why would you quit Bob Dylan's band? But he did.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's when Charlie showed up. And then, you know, because we're in Los Angeles, you do have access to a lot of guys, you know, who live around here. And again, you know, I kind of had contact with a lot of these guys later on who joined us. You know, Mac, of course, it's his birthday today, by the way. Mac, happy birthday, Ian McLagan.
Happy birthday.
Yes, but he came down, you know, initially, and then somehow another legendary, or maybe the other legendary keyboardist, Nicky Hopkins, actually called me at one point wanting to be a part of it. And so that was, you know, a very, you know, that phone call made me very happy. So we got him down there after clearing it with Mac first. Hey, Mac, is it okay if Nicky does a cover? Yeah, all right. So Nicky came down, and and did a few with us there. And ultimately, yeah. And that's also where we tracked the version of Take a Look at the Guy with Ronnie Wood, who was here in town working on his album at A&M Studios. I believe it was Slide on This, and I think that was the record he'd been working on. So he was here in town, so we snatched him up and got him.
And then did Keith Richards play on the album too?
Keith did not play on it, no.
I must be having. I read some story that Ronnie, before he would do the recording, he wanted to watch a movie with you guys or something.
Well, this particular recording, yes, we went to pick him up, and of course, Izzy, we were accustomed to sort of working earlier in the day, and so I think the intention was to get him, sort of to reach a middle ground and maybe like early evening kind of a situation. But once we arrived at where Ronnie was staying, he's like, "Hey lads, come on, I've just put on a movie," and sadly that movie turned out to be Spartacus, which was 3 hours.
Like 3 hours long, yeah.
So we sat there with Ronnie watching Spartacus, and he made jokes about Kirk Douglas and stuff, and which were hilarious. But anyway, we weren't in the studio, so by the time we ended up getting down there, it was quite a late affair.
So was it a pretty collaborative approach? Like when it came to songwriting, like you guys would just jam, or did Izzy just bring in a lot of ideas in and you worked off his ideas?
Well, it was both of those things, really. Izzy was very gracious in allowing us to have input, and I think everyone in the room, we were all very aware and intent on trying to make an album that he wanted to make, so I don't think anyone was pushing their own agendas in any way. It just happened that all the guys that ultimately were involved were very like-minded people musically to begin with. So it was the most effortless situation I think I'd ever encountered then, and and now.
When you guys first got together in the room, like you're all just sitting there, you're plugging in, did you guys just rip a jam, or did you guys just try to come up with a song right away, or how did it work?
Both. Both. Some songs came out of jams. There were a couple, whenever someone would show, like Nicky Hopkins was there, and he had this weird, this guy, he shows, he's like legendary friggin' grand piano master, and he showed up with like a $30 Casio keyboard, and he wanted to play that, and so what are you going to do? You can, it's Nicky Hopkins, so all right, Nicky, and there was a giant piano, we're all trying to sort of steer him towards, but he wanted to play this little thing. And so I remember that jam, he found some wacky like Moroccan Arabian sound that it was, I may have it on like a cassette or something, but I remember that jam went on like fucking forever, but it was brilliant. So again, and then other songs Izzy would have had more completed, and but until we had the actual core band of solidified of Charlie and Rick, a lot of that stuff, there were a lot of ingredients to the mix, but it was a combination of jamming and but I'd say it was a lot of it came from jamming. There'd be a core of an idea, but when Rick started playing the guitar, the first fucking day that he showed up, I think the first song we asked him to play on, I think we had maybe had a version of How Will It Go or something, and Rick just started playing, I think it was a Gretsch, but he had that just, it was just fucking unbelievable. It just like glued everything together, and and then we just ran with that. Everything that Rick played on after that was, just absolutely perfect.
Right on. So when you guys were in the studio and you guys were making these songs, like, would you start with the music first, or would you start with the lyrics first? Typically, like, I mean, if Izzy already had something written, did you want guys to just rap around it, or would he just be like, "Oh, these lyrics will work with this"?
I don't really remember. I know that some of them he would sort of, as you do, sort of shout stuff in mind that he didn't, he had taken a lot on that I don't think, even myself, I just assumed that he would be able to sing and write lyrics, without really even thinking about it, that the fact that he hadn't really done that before. He hadn't fronted a band, as far as I know or knew. And so, I guess, looking back on it, it was a pretty Herculean achievement, of him to just jump into that role and become, the lyricist, singer, and front person of his own band. That's a massive jump. So
Absolutely.
Kudos to him on pulling that off and doing it so effortlessly that I don't think any of us really, it didn't even register with us that was a hard thing to do. Lyrically or musically, I think we were just trying to figure out how we were going to be a band, and that's kind of what bands are supposed to do. They work together, and you change a guy, the sound of the band changes, at least in theory. And so we had to get the beat right, and then the sound came out as a result of that.
Now, I had read that when you guys were recording the album, you were recording it during the Rodney King riots, the LA riots. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, that was a fucker, right? And we were where we were, which was down there out that window. It's down in Redondo Beach. That was much closer to the sort of epicenter of what was going on. So I think the day that we rolled out of there, it may have been prior to Charlie's arrival, because I remember it was Stan Lynch from Tom Petty's band, from the Heartbreakers, who was playing drums. And I remember we were playing some like Chuck Berry song or something, and it was Stan. And we had asked the engineer to come over the microphone to let us know in our headphones if shit like started to get squirrely close by, or started to look like it was coming towards us. And sure enough, he's like, automatic weapons fired on Hawthorne and fucking Torrance or whatever, which was like, 3 blocks away. So we're like, that was when boom. And so Izzy, we just grabbed all the shit and made a run for it. And I'll never forget looking to ask Stan if he was going to get out of there. And I literally just have this vision of headphones sort of floating in the air where his head used to, he was
like a cartoon. Is it true Izzy was packing during that? Like, is it true that Izzy had guns in his car to protect him during that time?
Hey, ask the, who were those guys? The fucking Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
ATF, yeah.
I have no knowledge of that event.
So were you guys done the record by the time?
I would have been.
Yeah, I would have been too. So were you guys pretty much done the record at that point, or you had to like wait till the riots were over and then go back in the studio?
No, we bounced out immediately. We went to Chicago, moved the whole kit and caboodle up to Chicago. And that's when actual rehearsals began, because we had the band. So we got Charlie and Rick, and we holed up at the Knickerbocker Hotel in Chicago. And we booked rehearsal time at Chicago Rehearsal Complex, CRC. And then I think that's what it's called. And then we booked studio time and continued work on the album. Wrote a lot of songs there that sort of came out there. I believe Shuffle It All became what it was in Chicago. A lot of the final versions of those songs happened there. And so that's where a lot of the meat of the stuff took place. In fact, all the videos in that record are all shot in Chicago.
Were you at all in Chicago when Guns N' Roses was there rehearsing back in the late 80s?
Nah, I don't remember that. This would have been 91 into 92. So I think we would have missed that. Or at least I did. I don't know. I was unaware of those guys being anywhere near that. And I don't remember anyone mentioning it really.
At that point when you guys were in Chicago, did you guys have a record deal yet for your project with Izzy? Like, did you guys even know it was called the Juju Hounds at that point, or did that name kind of come after you guys were shopping around some records?
That name came out because of, again, going back to the jamming thing. If we were doing something new that Izzy hadn't developed lyrics yet, he'd sort of just mumble shit, and you just mumble stuff. And then maybe you go back later and find out the syllables and the sort of phrasing that may or may not work with the rhythm of the track, And at this one point he was singing something or shouting something that we all in the control room just heard as Juju Hounds. And then at first it was weird because, we didn't want to really be, the whatever dogs, and then we were looking, Izzy and I had a mad appreciation for, the reggae and the sort of that part of the world in the Caribbean, and, influenced by a lot of those guys as well. And so I remember, we were looking up, I was looking up, terms, in Jamaican sort of patois slang. And I was coming up with shit that, later on I would tell Mikey Dredd, who came down and helped us with a couple of songs, and he'd be laughing like, no, man, no, you can't be calling the band that, man, And it turned out they meant things that, I hadn't understood the meaning correctly. And so thank God we didn't go with any of those. But yeah, that's where the name sort of came from, and we settled on it because picking a name's a pain in the ass,
Yeah, because you're kind of stuck with it, right?
You're stuck with it, and then and a lot of times you don't really realize the global ramifications of that, because then in Spain, I think we were the Hoo Hounds, or the U, and in another place we were the UU Hounds, and so it was a shit show,
So when you guys hit the road with the Juju Hounds, you guys toured a lot in 92 and 93. Did you guys play mostly by yourselves, or were you guys opening for somebody, or you were touring with somebody else?
We didn't do a lot of opening. We did, again, I think Izzy was aware of the bit of the international situation with the kind of music that we were playing, and so we headed to Europe first before we did anything anywhere else. We did one show in Chicago, and then we jumped on a plane, and actually we went to Copenhagen in Denmark first to mix the record. So Izzy and I were there for a number of months, and we rented a little apartment in Copenhagen, and so we started the tour. If I remember correctly, we started the tour there on like a promo thing, and we didn't really go in a bus or a van. We took trains, which was a new way of doing it for me. I'd never done it, haven't done it since. But we rode on trains. So we'd play the gig, and we'd get in go to the train station afterwards, and then zoom to the next spot and do it again. So we had covered almost all of Europe, and then there were Japan. There's a Japan-Australia run, and so it was only after all of that did we book a proper U.S. run in a bus and all that jazz.
Did you guys? I had read that you guys were offered to play Saturday Night Live, or there was some opportunity for you guys to do it. Like, was that true at all?
Man, I didn't hear a lot of that shit until later, and also I understand that we were apparently offered the entirety of the Keith Richards and Expensive Winos tour that was turned down. I don't know where that came from. Certainly wasn't me.
I also heard there's a rumor that you got an offer to open for Bon Jovi. Is that correct?
That one we probably would not have done. That I do.
Thank you.
I do remember that, and we would have chosen not to do that one.
Yeah,
I would.
because I think I heard Alan Niven. He gave an interview and he said that, and I said, "Oh, that would have been interesting." But yeah, it would have been a weird match for sure.
Yeah, man.
So looking back at that tour, I know you had told a story where you guys played Australia too, right? You went over to Australia and Japan, and the record was really popular in Japan. And weren't you guys in Australia and like a fan ran up to Izzy and wanted to be punched in the face by him or something?
He did. He was very enthusiastic, very enthusiastic young man, and I think that punch was eventually sorted out by Izzy's security guard at the time. Maybe not exactly what he wanted, but maybe it's what he deserved.
Oh, that's an awesome story. So when you guys did the first Juju Hounds record, was there a lot of stuff that didn't make the record in the end, or you had a lot of leftover songs?
I don't remember. There were a couple of songs that I believe, in my opinion, were criminally left off of the record. One in particular was called "Got Away," and that's the song that when the MTV folks showed up at the studio, we were playing, and so they did like a little bit, like an interview or something, like on camera or whatever, and we were like, we were out in the control room, and we were playing that one, and from what I recall, it got a huge response from anyone who saw that clip, and everyone was very, very excited about hearing that song, because it wasn't the complete song. It was just like a little teaser, like a verse and a chorus that was captured. And then when the album came out, it was not there. So I think a lot of people were disappointed. And then later on, it managed to find itself on like a B-side or something that not a lot of people would have had or known about. And so that was tragic. And I remember fighting a bit, trying to push back against that decision. And I was told that, because I wanted to know why, why this entire process, no one had really interfered with us. And so we sort of had the unique opportunity to come up with this, or sort of organically. I guess there was a record deal in the very beginning, just sort of by default, because Izzy was on Geffen with GNR. So I don't know if that was absorbed.
That was going to be my next question.
Right. I can't remember.
Did Geffen just hand over the reins and say, "Do your thing"? Like, we know you're a talented human being and you guys will do fine. Here's some money. Or did he have to actually shop the record company and say, "Can I stay on the label"?
I don't know any of that stuff, man, but I wouldn't imagine it, Geffen, having been that magnanimous or generous to say, "Hey, go do your thing." I think part of it was that in the beginning, Izzy was paying for it and out of his own pocket, and we were moving really fast. We were sort of bobbing and weaving, and they couldn't really catch up to us. I think that combination of those things, came into play there. But the first serious influence I recall was the idea that song would not be included on the first one, and it came so late in the process that it was hard, for me to sort of reconcile that decision, and which is why, I tried to make it known that I didn't think it was a great idea. And I was told, well, and in classic fashion, the wording of these things will, there's a lot of creative wording that goes on. And in this particular one, it was, the reason I was given was that it was a descending chorus. Like the chorus went from a higher note to a lower one.
Wow.
Which, of course, Stairway to Heaven also has that affliction. So, there's only so much you can do, and that's how it happened. And I was disappointed in that, because I think that was a great song. I still do.
And then through like the Juju Hounds tour, didn't Izzy go back to Guns N' Roses for like 5 dates? Like, were you through like during the middle of your guys' tour, towards the end of the tour?
I don't know. I can't recall that. I remember him having done something immediately after our experience in the Caribbean, on what we were working towards as being the follow-up album. And I think at that point there was something, I understood something about Israel or something like that, where you rejoined the guys for a minute. But
when you guys were working on the second Juju Hounds record, was there a pretty strong response from the record label? Like they were really happy with the first record and they were pushing for you guys to do a second one?
No.
No, really? Wow.
No, not really, man. I don't think the first album was a success to Geffen in any way. I don't think it didn't do the numbers. It certainly didn't go platinum. I don't recall it going gold even. So, it wasn't a huge record. It's probably a bigger record now than it ever was then in America.
Okay, yeah, I was curious. So when you guys were working on that second record, did you guys have a lot of material for that second record, or you guys started a bit and then it kind of went sideways from there?
We started a bit, and it was good. I mean, we started in London at Wessex Studio, legendary studios there, working with a legendary guy called Bill Price, who had worked with the Clash and the Pistols, and in the very studio where those guys recorded. And so that was really, really great. And then we sort of transferred to a studio called the Caribbean Sound Basin in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is where we continued with Bill Price. We had Bill Price there with us.
Okay. So after the Juju Hounds, did you end up going and doing other musical projects right away, or did you take some time off? Because I mean, you guys have been working like pretty much nonstop. You've been touring. Did you feel burnt out by the road and you just wanted to take some time off after the Juju Hounds?
I wasn't burnt out. I was, speaking for myself, I can't really speak for anyone else. I was, very eager to continue. And that was, my favorite band I'd been a part of. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, really. I know the rest of the guys sort of moved on without a lot of difficulty. I had a hard time moving on from that. And so I ended up with turning down a lot of other things that in hindsight I probably should have taken jobs, but I didn't, because there was no clear ending to it. I wasn't told that it was over. It was just sort of, my friend sort of disappeared, and I had to kind of figure it out on my own, why that occurred and what that meant, to me. So it took me a long time, and I was, I went down a few dead end streets, and with regard to, my health and drugs and all that sort of stuff. So, drugs, jail, and all those fun times. So all that happened sort of in the years following the Juju Hounds.
Did you ever end up like keeping in touch with Izzy after the Juju Hounds, or it was like you guys kind of went your separate ways and worked on your own musical projects?
Yeah, we went our separate ways and worked on our own musical projects.
Did you? I had read your name on, at least on the credits for Izzy's. He put out his album, like, I don't know if it's supposed to be 117 or 117, but I know you're listed in some of the credits. Were those like old recordings that just were reappeared like on that album?
I don't think my name is listed, but the Juju Hounds are credited on 2 or 3 songs that were taken directly from the Trinidad sessions.
Oh, okay. That's what I was wondering. Yeah, because I wasn't too sure about that. So didn't you end up hooking up with Gilby Clarke like later on in the late 90s, or maybe you knew Gilby before?
No. Yes, I did know Gilby. I still do, but I never did anything with him of any consequence. I don't think.
Because I'd read that I guess Gilby had a band called the Starfuckers, and
no, I mean, but that was, that's like right down the street here. There's Slim Jim's bar. I think maybe you may have gotten that impression from a photograph.
There was a photo of you, Gilby, and Axel, and like Axel hadn't really been out in public for a long time. And then like he kind of reappeared, and like the first place people saw him was with you and Gilby on stage.
Right, but that was a total accident. I just happened to be walking by. I mean, like I said, the place was like right down the street, and it was a bar owned by my friend, or co-owned by my friend Slim Jim. Yeah, and Jim had that band, the Starfuckers, who played on Thursdays or whatever with my friend Stefan Adika and Mother Core Guys, I believe, and then Gilby was part of that. But everybody sort of breezed through there at one point or another to play either with the band or to sit in. And that was kind of one of the last remaining spots where something like that would happen, regularly. And so, unfortunately, it's gone now, of course. But every Thursday or Tuesday, whatever night it was. And so it just happened to be on one of those nights. I happened to be walking past the joint, like out in front. And, I remember this big black fucking car pulls up, and this chauffeur comes out who was a babe. It was like a super hot chick. So I was looking at the driver of the car. She had the chauffeur's cap on and the whole deal. I was like, damn. And then, Axel jumped out, and then he saw, I guess he just grabbed me sort of and was like, hey, come in here. I hadn't seen him for years. And he just grabbed me and said, come in and sing Wild Horses with me or something. And I was like, dude, I'm not a singer, right? And you remember. And he's like, yeah, just come in and do it. So I did, and somebody took a picture, and that was the end of that.
That pretty much blew up the internet. I mean, that was a picture. Nobody had seen Axel in years.
Yeah.
And, like,
I figured
it's
that
in
out.
Rolling Stone. It's in all these magazines, all these websites. I mean, that was the first emergence of Axl Rose in a very long time.
Yeah, lucky me, right?
Publicly.
Yeah.
And you're the first person to hear. I would have been like, yes, sir. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know what was going on. It was all a bit of a fog for me at that point.
So I wanted to ask you how you, from there you went and you played for quite a while in Buckcherry. How did you end up getting the gig with Buckcherry?
We can talk about this briefly.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't remember, to be honest. I mean, I remember being, I sort of, lost the plot there for a minute, and, my car was sort of skidding out of control for a number of years. And I finally, managed to get it together enough to start playing a little bit after having not played at all. And the first thing I did, the only thing that was happening locally that was of any interest to me at all was my buddy Mike Stinson had come out from behind the drum kit, was where I knew him from, and begun to sing and write these fucking incredible country songs with a voice full of passion and, just like a fucking angel. And so, and he had another just knockout guitar player, Tony Gilkison, who a lot of people will remember was in X for a little while, but just a legendary Los Angeles musician. And the guys sort of surrounding Mike, I think everybody recognized that Mike was emerging as one of the nation's most gifted songwriters. And so, and Mike and I had a relationship already, and so he asked me if I'd be interested in doing that, which of course I did. And so I think it was at one of those shows when Rick Richards came to town, and I picked Rick up at the airport, and I think we went either to one of those shows or something like that. And we were sitting at the bar, and Rick started talking to this guy who I didn't know who he was. And I heard the guy ask Rick, like, hey, whatever happened to that bass player in the Juju Hounds? And Rick was like, kind of like, and I was like, face down on the bar. So that was Keith from Buckcherry. And I had no idea, I had no knowledge of that band at all at that time, other than I remember I'd seen like written on a park bench or something while I was waiting on the bus to go to my, dope dealer's house. And I saw, that they had like advertising for that first record, but I'd never listened to it. And I was just pissed off that they had better advertising than we ever had. So that was the only reference I had. But then again, it was a guy who was asking me to play. So most people who asked me to play, I end up playing. I didn't have any idea that it was going to turn into a band or a tour or any of that stuff. And it was the way it was presented to me was, it is indeed a band, and we're going to go in and make a record, and you can write songs. So that's sort of like, dog whistle for me. Write songs, make a record. Sure, I'll do that. And so, and band, like democracy, that's attractive proposition. Unfortunately, sometimes that turns out not to be true. So yeah, I had no idea, but I was happy, help with that record. And as it happened, a lot of the weird stars aligned that need to align in order to allow a record to go on to enjoy that commercial success. And but the irony was never lost on me that the commercial success was basically for something that I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to be negative in any way, those guys, but I just felt strongly that I'd been involved with things that were possibly more worthy of commercial success prior to that. And, I guess that's pretty fucking negative, but, what are you going to do?
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask you, like as a musician, you were playing in the 80s all the way to now. How do you feel about the state of music today? When you look at how it's changed so much, like I'm almost surprised the record labels even exist. And, now you've got all the streaming services and YouTube and all these different ways that people are finding and listening to music. I mean, do you think that's a good thing, or as a musician, do you not like that?
I'll tell you exactly what I think. The technology has been great in some ways, and in others not. And that's sort of, the reality of it. The ability to record essentially, in your house has opened up that world to a lot of people who would never have had access to that. Unfortunately, going back to what we were talking about earlier, it seems to have killed the regional aspects of a crowd situation in a town responding to a subculture that of a lot of like-minded young people getting together for a live music experience. That's where it used to come from. And we're not seeing that anymore. We're not seeing a lot of acts that that I'm aware of, that are coming. People don't tend to associate them with a part of the country or a part of the world. It's just like they just exist all of a sudden. And that's interesting dynamic. Another thing that I think will affect moving forward, here we are, we're talking about bands that, this stuff happened 30 years ago. We're not talking about stuff that's happening now. And if you look around, there really isn't a whole lot, which is concerning. And I think that, there might be a lot of explanation. You would think the opposite would be true, right? If everybody has access to this stuff and everybody can make records, it'd be shitloads of records.
Yeah.
But there are, but it's sort of like a dispersed around the globe in like a layer of like sort of fucking oatmeal. You have to be able to know about what you're looking for to be able to find it. And that's I think can be discouraging to some people, when it was a lot, the process of discovering things was a lot different. Another thing about, I hear a lot that, oh man, nobody needs a major label anymore. That is true in order to achieve a certain level of success. But, I think people aren't understanding how the business works in that, the reason we have Guns N' Roses, or more currently even a Foo Fighters, which, aren't exactly brand new, but we have that level of saturation that only can occur. It doesn't come from radio, and it doesn't come from advertising. There's another level to that stuff, and that's when that stuff becomes a household name. It reaches people's subconscious. It's like when you start hearing it in the gas station, in the supermarket, and the elevator. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that permeates, almost imperceptibly. People don't notice that that's what's happening, but then people are like, "Oh, I know that song. I've heard that song before." And unfortunately, independents and us, as me, if I'm sitting here making a record, I don't have access to that. This is corporate. This big corporate stuff. There's a clear channel, and people that you're never going to touch, and unless you have that sort of liaison between people at the majors still have access to these people, but we don't, and we never will. And I don't know that any independents can manage that. If there are any, please get in touch. I see that as being a big problem. And so what you're going to end up another thing about this whole trip is an observation on society itself, because I think we're at a point now where you see these guys in these bands are rebels. They're guys that would have been arrested now for the behavior that was going on back then. We'd all be in fucking jail. And when you have a society that is now so interconnected, where being a rebel as an artist of any kind is you almost can't survive. You can't, there's certain things you can't do. You can't open a bank account and shit like that. If you've got, everyone wants to do a background check. I look like shit on paper. Nobody's going to give me nothing. I'm not getting a loan. None of that shit is happening for me. So, I mean, you end up with these guys who are essentially the people who make changes historically, throughout cultural past, going back to, fucking medieval times. There's the actors, nobody wanted the actors around, rolling around in their fucking caravans and shit, entertaining people. They were totally frowned upon by society, and a lot of them were, strung up or fucking whatever. And so when your society doesn't allow for rebels, you better get used to the corporate stuff that you do have, because that's all you're ever going to have, because there's not going to be new guys coming through to change that. The change comes from the population. It comes from the populace. It comes from the fans and the bands and the relationship they have to the band. And then that forces the corporations to take notice. Whereas I see now young artists and musicians, the first thing out of the gate, in order for them to, get their YouTube channel noticed or whatever it is to ally themselves with a corporate sponsor immediately. It's the first thing, because the record companies aren't going to give them the money they need. You need money. This shit costs money. You know, it costs money to roll around the country in a van or whatever.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, you end up with, you know, again, the rebels can't survive because they're not making any money. And, you know, and then you end up with these guys who ally themselves with, you know, like you have like a festival like South by Southwest or something. It started off very organically and sort of as a voice of the underground, an opportunity to showcase your shit, right? But you can't get in there. You know, you can't fucking get in there unless you've got like, you know, Doritos or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
it almost seems like it's so corporate now.
Well, it all is. That's
Yeah.
why it seems that way. And the problem you have with that, people are like, well, what's wrong with that? I go to a corporation and get the money. Well, the problem with it is the minute you write a lyric that doesn't align itself with the corporate values, you know, you're fucked. So there's that, you know, so already we're being edited. We're being edited right out of the gate.
So I'm guessing, Jimmy, you probably had times where you guys were recording in the studio and you had the companies you were dealing with who would try to have some sort of control over what you guys are writing.
Well, that didn't happen. I would expect that would happen now, though.
Oh, okay.
It would happen, but in a very sort of a much more delicate way. You know, it would maybe be suggested or something, and then you could say no. But you know, or whatever. You know, it was every relationship with every you know A&R person was unique. You know, they were all different, so you can't really. There's no way to blanket statement that. But I believe now in the you know litigious sort of attorney ruled society that we seem to find ourselves in, that would be more of a problem now as opposed to less of a problem. In the end, a record company is a record company. It's their job to make records. You know, Doritos makes fucking Doritos. So, you know, their concern is the people who buy Doritos. It's not the people who buy records, you know, so they don't want anything fucking that up. So if you start saying weird shit, you know, in your song or whatever, you're going to get shut the fuck down. So
Pringles are better.
Right. There you go. I mean, I've had this, I mean, I've been able to witness this through an artist that will remain unnamed, but there was a guy I was opening up for not that long ago who, you know, first of all, I'm backstage at these gigantic fucking shows where like my recollection of shows of that size was like fucking mayhem, right? You know, I mean, any door that you open, you'd open and somebody'd be fucking in there, like, you know, it'd be syringes or whatever. You'd be like, whoa, dude, sorry, you know, slam the door. It was just, there was crazy shit going on, you know, and that's been replaced, you know, sort of. There's a lot of cappuccinos and phones happening, and that's about it. So I'm walking around this giant venue, and there's fucking nobody backstage. There's no chicks. There's no nothing. You know, you got a problem when there's no chicks backstage, man. I'm sorry, but you know that's sort of an integral part of the whole experience that we're just kind of missing. But on this particular one, there's no chicks and then the headliner guy's in there, and he's like, "Hey, Jimmy, come here." You know, it's just a room with him and this other guy, and he goes, "This is this guy," and he says his name to me, which I won't say. And this guy is famous for making fucking sandwiches or something, and the guy, the artist, goes, "Hey, you know, here's this guy. He said he's offered me this many dollars to, you know, say the name of his sandwich." And I started laughing because it was hilarious to me that I thought he was kidding. You know, like, why would you, you know, yeah, and this next one's called, but before that, is anyone hungry? You know what I mean? Why would you, there's a fundamental disconnect to me, but he wasn't joking. And that continued to happen throughout the remainder of that tour. And there was a sandwich involved. And so, you know, that, I'm sorry, but you know, that goes against everything that we sort of were accustomed to. You know, if you did that 25 years ago, you'd be laughed out of the business.
Yeah, it's changed
even
so
today.
Much. It's crazy. Even today, yeah.
Yeah, if they knew. Yeah, I mean, you get people, you get this. The concert goer sort of seems also inexperienced, and I mean, not that they should be, but I don't know. I feel like we arrived at a lot of weird shit's going on, is what I'm trying to say. So you end up, another thing that was surprising to me is you end up with a lot of bands. And when you're on a tour, decorum sort of dictates that you just can't go online and start outing these people for stupid shit that they do, right? Or else you're going to get your ass kicked off the tour. Everyone's going to be pissed off at you and whatever. But, you end up, and this isn't any particular person, it's sort of a general malaise that I've noticed seems to, pervade this whole world out there, is you got a lot of guys and you got playing, and then you got a lot of shit going on backstage electronically, let's say. There's mad, like, fucking laptops going on back there with any variety of shenanigans being piped out through the speakers for the people to hear out in front. They don't see this shit going on, and you can't be going, hey, everybody, look at this shit that's going on, because, you're not going to be a popular guy. And but unfortunately, what happens is you get guys that are no longer doing anything live except for sort of leaping about and gesturing and pointing at shit, and the actual voice is coming out. It's been a pre-recorded track, and that's great and all, and that's been going on for a long time. Unfortunately, now we're at the point where people don't know this. They forgot, or they don't mind, and they don't care, and what happens is a band that maybe goes on after or before these guys, who decides that they don't like that and don't want to participate in that, and actually want to put in the effort to learn their own songs and fucking sing them and perform them live to the crowd, we would end up with a lot of people going, man, those guys fucking suck ass, man. They can't play. They don't sound anything like the fucking record. It's whacked, you can't, it doesn't sound perfect, and my argument was fucking not the record. That's why we drove all this way to play here, but so that's sort of a mind fuck in that it kind of, it's sort of tripping over itself, this phenomenon, to the point now where the listener doesn't realize that it's fake, and started attacking what is real, which ironically is also seems to be happening in the world.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, Jimmy, like, are there any bands that you're listening to these days that have come up like recently, or is a lot of what you're listening to, from further back?
No, there's loads of bands, man. There's not. I'm not finding, like, again, you have to fucking look, man. You have to want it. You have to want to find them, and I'm finding in the genre sort of the stuff that I am used to and have always done. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's just unfortunately not going around close by. Some of it is, but I think Scandinavia is producing loads and loads of killer, amazing rock and roll bands, and a lot of guys who I know, friends of mine, are taking their rock and roll bands and going to periodically play in Spain, where they really appreciate that kind of music. The UK hasn't changed in that regard either. They've always and consistently will put out, produce great stuff. There are a few things in Los Angeles going on. There's a band of young girls who I think are fucking incredible, called the Regrets, and they've fortunately been picked up by a major. I think they're on Warner Brothers. They're like 16-year-old chicks, it's fucking great songs, great writing, and incredibly powerful. All of them, singers. And so there's stuff, and a lot of the guys that I respect, if they're still going on, they're still active, and they're still making music. Unfortunately, it's one of those situations where they're up against a lot of these obstacles I mentioned in this interview, and yet they persevere. Mike Stinson plays, around all the time, and there are yeah, there are loads. I'm constantly interested in and trying to look for stuff. You know, sometimes stuff finds me, but that Regrets band was actually recommended by a dear friend in the UK, even though it was fucking happening right down the street, right? So my friend Ginger, who has a band called the Wild Hearts in London, he mentioned them, and after a little bit of investigation, I was able to find it. Phenomenal.
So yeah, well, you talked about Spain. It's when my wife and I were there about a year ago, and you're right. Like I got the sense that even Portugal, but more Spain, that people were a lot more appreciative of rock music there. It seems like it's still alive and well. But
they are, man. There are a few festivals. One of the coolest ones is the Azkena Festival, and that is still in Bilbao in the Basque country in the north, and that place sticks in my memory. Did a gig there with, it was a bill like the New York Dolls and the Stooges or whatever it was, like at that point, which is like, unheard of anywhere else. And
nice lineup.
And there was instead of, what struck me about that festival was that instead of, T-shirts and beer and fucking pretzels or whatever, instead of all that, there was a little record store in the middle of the pitch, where all the kids were, and people were actually going in there and finding and buying records, and they had like MC5 records in there and shit, you wouldn't find vinyl, and what a concept at a concert, sell fucking records, right, instead of pretzels or funnel cakes or whatever the fuck.
The way a record store should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that was, and people were in there, they were in there, they were buying records, man. They were like looking through the shit in between bands. It was a beautiful thing.
So are you a pretty big appreciator of like the vinyl resurgence that's come back over the last couple of years?
Well, I like it. I don't have a fucking record player. I don't know why, but I just don't have one. I need to get one. I love it, and it's in a way it's a little bit sad because I know that Los Angeles is one of those towns where there was an entire industry surrounding. It's what the whole fucking city. That's what it's here. That's why it exists. There's a film industry. It's all entertainment, and there was a record industry, and there were loads and loads of vinyl manufacturing services and plants and guys. Most importantly, the guys. It was the people who ran these places who were the knowledgeable guys. And it's very sad to me that a lot of these guys, when the digital sort of thing came about, everyone was so quick to turn their backs on that stuff that these guys could no longer support themselves and went out of business. And so you end up losing a lot of that knowledge, that took decades to accumulate with these older guys. It's always been a young man's game, but I think that's to a fault many times, because I know for a fact there are guys who I wish were still alive today that I could ask about things that they were well versed in and very knowledgeable, and they were sort of cast aside, towards the end of their lives. And now we don't have them anymore. And we certainly don't have any of those pressing plants or, mastering facilities and all that stuff with these people in them, that were professionals. And now it's run by amateurs, and people who are just figuring it out as they go. So that repository of knowledge that we accumulated over time was lost. And that's tragic to me. The fact that vinyl is now making a resurgence is cool, I guess. I just wish it had kind of never gone away. We still have a lot of these guys, and we still have a lot of this knowledge. Same with recording software. We got all these gizmos. I got right on my screen, right. I got 10 zillion buttons I could poke at, but there are guys who used to know how to make this stuff happen. And I still find there are a lot of people today wondering how these sounds were made with gear that has a fraction of the capabilities of the gear we have now, you know. Well, the answer to that would have been, you know, the people who are running it. And once you cast those people aside, you know, they didn't write that shit down. You know, it's just lost. So that's terrible. The MP3 sucks ass, dude. You know, I mean, first of all, you know, I don't think anyone really is aware of how much quality you lose, but it certainly, I can't really get fucking anything to sound like what it sounds like in a recording studio, a proper recording studio with like real people in it and drums and shit. I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with this? You know, like it's not working right or something, and I'm just not getting it. And I think people listen to music differently. You know, it's a much more casual affair. You know, you're listening to it while you're doing other shit. You know.
Do you also think that's some of the mystery, like behind a lot of the records? Like, you know, I guess when you were a kid is kind of gone, because you'd go to the record store and whatever you knew about the band, you probably only saw on MTV and you saw on the sleeve of the record. Now it's like everybody's got a social media account. There's, you know, everybody's doing interviews, and there's just so much, everything's so much in your face now. Whereas, you know, back in the day, I can imagine there's a lot more mystery around bands.
Yeah, there sure was. And I think crucial to that is the lack of information that you get with your, you know, digital bullshit on your phone. You know, you don't know who played on what. You don't know who the people in the band's names are. You don't know who the producer was, which is crucial. You know, if you like the sound of a record, you kind of want to know that. You know, you know, I would think, you know, you would know that, and then you'd go get some of that person's other stuff they worked on, and maybe it would also appeal to you. You know, we're seeing that in everything. You know, nobody gives a flying fuck. You know, you get videos on YouTube, and it doesn't tell you who the director was. Someone asked me that the other day, who directed, you know, those certain video or whatever, and I had to really, you know, go back and that's when I just realized that, you know, that information you can't. It's very difficult to find. You know,
that's true. I never even thought about that. That's absolutely true.
Right. And, you know, it's insane to me. You know, I mean, it's great for the casual listener, you know, who likes to enjoy things while they're doing other things. But it's not great for the committed listener. And I think there are a lot of people out there who, when they put on a record, they want to listen to the whole record, and they want to have that experience and, you know, have it relate to some portion of their lives or something. And as a result of that, you would then become more curious about the people who made the thing that is affecting your life.
Yeah, like one question I had, like as a musician, I always wondered this because I've always got different answers from whoever we interview. Do you enjoy the process of making the music videos, or are you more of the person who likes to just, you know, go play a concert or be in the recording studio?
Well, I like making the cool ones, you know, when the person making it knows what it is that you're doing and appreciates it. Those are great. And ironically, those are, you know, the ones that don't cost a whole lot and usually take, you know, a couple hours. You know, it's the real long drawn out affairs that, you know, is some asshole, some guy with a production company who contacted your manager because he wants exposure for his production company. It has nothing to do with the artist. You know, we would get people wanting to do videos for, you know, the band and be like, well, which of these video directors do you like? I'm like, well, I don't fucking know. I don't know any of them. How about send them out on the road and let them get to know us for 2 or 3 days and watch the show, and then do that. You know, I mean, how hard is that? It's not fucking rocket science. But to have someone who's never met you roll in and decide that they want to do a video that's completely, it's their vision of the fucking song, and it's to showcase their production company and what they can do for like whatever the budget is, you know, to impress the suits with how cheaply they can do it. It doesn't make any fucking sense. You know, and unfortunately, it's the fan that suffers. You know, and the artist. You know, before you had the artist, you had the fucking listener, right? It was a direct communication. I mean, before, like, you know, way before, like medieval days. You know, that's how it worked. And then you end up with all these sort of entities that invented themselves to pop up in between. You know, you got managers, you got booking agents, you got publicists, and now you got video production company, all these people. And so they, you know, somehow that the direct communication is diluted. You know, you have to continue reaffirming your vision to every one of these people. And invariably, one of them is going to drop the ball. And so you've broken the chain.
So what did you make of like music videos? Like, you know, when you talk about over the top, you know, like songs like November Rain come to mind, around like honestly like mini stories. Like, what did you think when you saw videos like that on MTV?
Well, it's kind of lame, right? I mean, fucking, yeah. I mean, to me, man, I don't know. It's a personal thing, I guess. I mean, keep in mind, millions of people saw those videos, and you and I probably wouldn't be chatting here if they hadn't made them.
Yeah.
But I think on the Juju Hounds, the two official videos were both done by the same guy. And again, I can't remember his fucking name because it's not written anywhere. And I'm trying to, you know, go back through my like old phone books or whatever to find out the guy's fucking name. But he would have been the same guy who I think did Paradise City. And
we interviewed that guy. Shoot, how come I can't remember his name now?
He got roller skates.
He
got roller skates. That's the guy.
Nigel Dick.
What? Nigel Dick? I don't know if it was him. Maybe. I don't know. It was the guy with the roller skates, man. It was the guy, and that's why we got this fucking guy, because he had rollers, and he was like a roller skating fucking maniac. And he had these inline skates, and he had the camera up on his shoulder. And so instead, that made it possible for him to zoom around and not need those train tracks that you put the camera on, you know, the fucking steady.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's, you know, that was just so, it's, you know, entertaining as hell to watch when you're like actually playing, because there's this fucking maniac rolling around. But he was incredible. And so that, you know, and that was obviously someone who already was familiar with what we were doing. And those videos took like fucking 3 minutes, you know, and the guy like rolled past a couple of times, zoom, and then he's gone. And then concept wise, we didn't really have any. He just like take some pictures of us and stick them together and put the music on top, except for the train tracks one. I think we wanted a car in it. And so I'm really into cars, you know, and so I figured do like a 1978 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz, because that's just like a fucking pimp mobile, you know. And I'm like, yeah, let's grab one of those. And we were in Chicago, so Izzy goes, yeah, let's pick one up. And so we found it in the Auto Trader, and there was one for sale for like a couple bucks or whatever out by the airport, and so that became the video. The guy, the director had the camera, and so it's just literally us driving to the airport to buy this fucking Cadillac, which we did. And then we rode around with it in it for a little bit. And then there was the live show, and that was the video. But the funny end to that story is that car was left in a parking garage at the Knickerbocker Hotel in Chicago. And we never went back to pick it up. It's just, it's just sitting there.
Try getting it out of the gate now.
Yeah.
That's going to be
$10 million in charges on that son of a bitch. But it was a cool ass ride, man. But that's the video, is us going to buy the car. You know? So I mean, it's not fucking rocket science, man. We're not making movies here. You know, I get that it is probably fun for the songwriter, you know, to see that vision realized in such a dramatic way, and you know, planes or whatever. You know, laser beams. But to me, it's videos have always been a thing where, you know, to me, I don't think you can tell people what they should imagine when they read this, when they listen to a song. You know, everybody's got their own relationship with a song, you know. And when you start to make a video that's a little bit too suggestive of a way they think you should think of the song, that gets stuck in your brain, and it kind of ruins your concept of what that could have been, how that relates to you in your life, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I've pretty much asked all my questions, Jeff. I don't know if you've got any more questions for Jimmy.
No, that was a solid couple hours. It's just awesome, man.
Cool.
I think I got all my questions answered, other than any forthcoming projects that you're either thinking about working on, wanting to work on.
Well, man, you know, I don't know. I got sort of spaced out after that whole last experience. And again, you know, I'm not really a side guy. I never feel comfortable just going and playing in other people's bands for salary. I don't like being an employee of anyone, really. And so I have problems as a result of that, you know, so it's hard for me to really jump from one thing to the next. But at this point, I don't know. And with the situation, you know, all of these points that we covered in this interview, you know, it makes it a discouraging prospect to start something brand new from scratch. You know, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of people throwing a bunch of money at you, you know, to allow that to happen, especially not for me at this point in my life. So, you know, and I think I'm at this point, you know, continually going to be hard to work with, which is the term industry people like to saddle you with when you present them, when you disagree with them or present them with any problem of any size. You're automatically hard to work with. You know, again, it's the hard to work with guys that usually make the best. But I don't know, man. I got some songs kicking around. You know, I went to Italy. I went to Naples. I think it's fucking kick ass over there. You know, I'll probably take my little songs and go over there at some point. Maybe make a little tiny record, get in a little tiny fucking, get on a Vespa or something and tour around in the summertime. Like that.
I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And like, I can totally relate to when you're talking, Jimmy, about going and working for someone else. Like, I think I've definitely learned that over the past year. So like having freedom in your life is, I mean, nothing can replace that.
Freedom and a little bit of ownership of what we do. You know what I mean? That's sort of the key. And that's, I think, why we all started doing this in the first place. If I haven't forgotten, you know, if I'm not mistaken, that's why, you know, we didn't get the job at Taco Bell or whatever, you know? So there's that.
Right. I ask all our musician guests, have you ever had a Spinal Tap moment on stage? If so, what was it?
Oh man. Yeah, probably.
Sorry to put you on the spot, man.
No, it's cool. I'm just trying to think of anyone that, you know, well, not me, of course. These would never have happened to me, but, you know, I may have observed someone else fucking blowing it. But no, I'm just kidding. We never had any drummers combust, or, you know, it's difficulty escaping from any pods. Let me see. I can't really say, man. You know, the only stupid shit was probably our own fault, so I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. You know what I'm saying? But I mean, there's been, you know, some seriously Spinal Tap booking, you know, fuck ups where you're like, how the fuck did I end up here? You know, under the puppet show or whatever. And so there's been loads and loads of those. That just goes with the territory. I mean, the guys that made that movie, you know, definitely knew what they were talking about.
That's fine. A lot of guests who come on and they've said the exact same thing. All right. Thank you so much, Jimmy. We appreciate it so much for coming on.
Thank you, Jimmy. We really do.
Oh, guys, thanks for hitting me up, man. Sorry it took me so long. I don't respond to a lot of people, so some of my messages get blocked. But cheers, guys. Anything I can do for you in the future, let me know. Yeah, and
anytime you want to come on, if you end up putting out that record you were talking about, just come on, and yeah, we'd love to talk to you about it.
Awesome, man. Will do. Thank you so much for that.
our pleasure.
Have a great day, guys.
You too.
You too, man. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thanks for taking time with us.
Hey,
Rock
brother.
on.
See ya.
Hey, boys.